Hi, I'm Ernie Shimizi, and we have a very special program for you. We're right now here at Camp Hero in Montauk, the site of what many believe to have been the Montauk Project. And I'm joined by a gentleman who has a first-hand recollection of this place, Stewart Swerdlow. Stewart, it's a pleasure for us to have you on our air. I know you've traveled all the way from the Midwest to be part of this program. You're the author of Montauk, The Alien Connection. It's your autobiography, and you are a survivor of the Montauk Project.
Yes, that's correct. It's kind of strange when you say that, because I've survived so many other things, too. But my understanding is less than 1% of the people that went through that project survived. And of that less than 1%, very few are able to function in physical reality in society.
Your book is fascinating. In fact, it's part of a group of works that you've been working on. But it all began here in Montauk, and you were born on Long Island.
Actually, Brooklyn, which I guess is physically part of Long Island.
Let's talk about this place. And in the background here of us is this Sage radar tower. Just looking at that, what does that conjure up for you to be here?
Well, even after all these years, and it's been about 30 years, just being here, the energy of the place makes me kind of queasy and unsettled. It's very different now than it was back then. That tower, to me, represents the transmission of everything that we were traumatized in underground and then broadcast out to satellites in the local area and then eventually the world. So this is a very, in my opinion, historic location, but not for the reasons that people think it is.
Speaking of the history, before we talk of your specific connection here, for the benefit of our viewers, they've heard of the Philadelphia experiment. Mm-hmm. That was the event which came before the Montauk Project. Right. If we can talk about that, the USS Eldridge.
Yeah, that was part of a project back in 1943 during the war when the military was trying to develop a device using Tesla equipment to cloak ships and planes, etc., because in those days radar wasn't as advanced as it was later on. And what they did was tried to cloak this USS Eldridge in the Philadelphia Naval Yard. And the ship went into what I call hyperspace energetic levels, where it becomes non-physical. Physical objects are not designed to do that, and people on board, their bodies became energetic. But to make a long story short, also in space and time in 1983, Montauk was the project going on here, and energetically they linked up in hyperspace so that there was a connection between 1943 and 1983, creating a loop in time, if you will.
The Philadelphia experiment ended horribly, didn't it?
Yes, because when the ship finally became solid again, if there was a naval person who happened to be walking through an area that had been physically part of a wall or equipment and then it became solid, they became embedded in that equipment and died.
But again, the intention was to cloak this ship during World War II so it could evade...
be undetected by German equipment, etc. But the odd thing is that there were German observers during the Philadelphia experiment itself. So on some level, both the U.S. and German governments were working really in tangent with each other.
Enter a fellow named John von Neumann, who's, by background, he's the inventor of the modern computer. Mm-hmm. He takes this research, he was a lead research person, you write, as part of the Philadelphia experiment, and brings that research to Brookhaven National Labs.
Yeah. He supposedly was working with the Tesla equipment and then expanding upon that using actually alien technology, and then developing a new technology based on the first two that went interdimensional, went beyond physical time and space, and then was able to map out specific points in time and space so that time travel was actually possible.
You wrote that he attempted to couple computer technology with sophisticated radio equipment in an attempt to link people's minds with machines. Over time, his efforts were quite successful. After years of empirical experimentation, human thoughts could eventually be received by esoteric crystal receivers and relayed into a computer which could store the thoughts in terms of information bits. A virtual mind-reading machine was constructed.
Yeah.
Then Camp Hero comes into the picture. This was an Air Force base.
Scheduled to be derelict Air Force base in 1970 because of the SAGE radar, which was becoming obsolete. And so they needed a place that was out of the way, and Montauk Point is very much out of the way, especially in those days, where there would not be a lot of eyes prying and people thinking that something strange was going on. And this was an already established underground area, so it was a perfect location to perform these kinds of experiments.
So the actual Montauk project began in the 1970s. It wasn't...
1970, to be exact. And that was an outgrowth, really, it's going back even to the Roswell event that happened in 1947 when the alien presence was publicly then known, and then the Cold War was continuing, and there was a threat from the Soviet Union. The people were afraid of what just transpired with the Nazi threat, and so now here was an alien threat. And so what better way to control population other than fear, and then using mind control to enhance that and turn people into a planet of robots, which they've been successful in doing since then.
We're looking at the SAGE radar tower, and Congress received a report about this project that was going on here, and they ordered that it be disbanded for fear of having their own minds controlled. This is what you write. But a secret group with deep financial resources sought out to seduce the military with the idea that this technology could be used in warfare to control enemy minds. You also go on to say that they would establish a new research facility here on Camp Hero, this derelict Air Force station at Montauk Point, and which would really, the interesting point of this is the locale was chosen because it housed a huge SAGE radar antenna, which coincidentally emanated a frequency of 400 to 425 megahertz, which is the band for mind control.
Yes, and it also affects human DNA. So that if you transmit that frequency, you can actually alter genetic sequences or actually open or close genetic sequences, depending on what you want to accomplish.
It's 1970. Where is Stewart Swerdlow in all of this?
Well, that was a teenage boy living in central Long Island who was brought here occasionally, sometimes days at a time, sometimes just for a night or for a few hours, and used in those experiments and other things, including ritual ceremonies, indoctrinations, all kinds of training that went on here. Supposedly, they never expected myself or any of the others to really survive, and I became an anomaly because I did survive. And not only did I survive, but I retained memory, which I'm not supposed to have. They wiped the memories for the boys that they took in and then would release back into the public on a regular basis. And no one was supposed to remember, but I had conscious memory of it. And sometimes, and even to this day, as my wife will attest, I have terrible nightmares about these kinds of things, even all these years later.
You wrote that there were 300,000 primarily young men. For some reason, boys were utilized as opposed to...
Correct.
And
yeah.
Why was that?
Female energy absorbs, male energy projects out. They wanted someone who could project out energy, psychically, sexually, and in many other ways. And so they used males because male energy, especially when you combine it together, creates a tremendous burst that can be used as a transmission and a download.
So when you would, as a young boy, 13 years old, you'd go to sleep, you would have recurring nightmares and images of this place.
Yes, and then I would actually be taken at times. And they had the technology here at Montauk to actually create artificial wormholes, and there's a difference between a vortex and a wormhole. A wormhole creates a connection between 2 points in the same reality, and a vortex creates a connection between 2 different realities. So they would create an artificial wormhole in a specific point, like my room, and actually come into my room to take me and bring me here in a matter of a second.
Recurring nightmare. Then I would be running naked in a warehouse-like environment without any windows in it, running through corridors and hallways trying to hide from these people that were coming after me. These were not alien beings. These were human beings dressed in navy blue and black uniforms with insignia on it. And at the end of each of the nightmare segments, they would always find me and capture me. And it was the same dream over and over and over again. I would also have experiences where I'd go to bed and wake up in a different environment. One where I was strapped to a table, where mechanical devices were attached to my body, where I would be forcefully, energetically pushed out of my body into a different time and space and location. And I would also remember being indoctrinated, where we would sit in a room, sometimes square, sometimes rounded ceiling, facing a wall, and behind us was either a person or mechanical device that would transmit information and indoctrinate us about who and what we are, what our goals and lessons were to be, what we were to experience. And at times in front of us on this blank white wall, as the voice would speak and indoctrinate, there would be the scene or the image of what we were hearing, as if it were a living movie. And then sometimes we'd be thrown right into that movie to participate in it. And this went on for quite a number of years. And during that time period, many physical anomalies occurred with me. I had internal bleeding. My eyesight completely diminished so that I could not see physical reality. All I could see were the energy fields that emanated from people, places, and things. I would see colors and symbols that emanated from the mind pattern. It was like reading a sentence. Every time I would see a person or go into public, everything about that person would be right there for me to perceive. And imagine, this is just a small group of people, relatively, picking up all of your information, where you were born, where you came from, what you're going to do, what's going to happen to you, and even what you were in other existences, what I refer to as simultaneous existences. And so it became very hard to deal with physical reality and life. And so towards the middle 1980s, I would become very interested in drinking and becoming an alcoholic. I tried to commit suicide several times. It was not a very pleasant life. I had a very difficult marriage, difficulty with my children. And finally, when things were getting really, really bad, and Peter referred to experiences where I was really entrapped in a legal situation and threatened to be placed in a mental institution for the rest of my life, or even in prison for the rest of my life if I didn't say and do certain things.
Your life from when you were 13 to when you discovered what this was all about must have been a living hell for you.
Well, sometimes it still is. You know, you never really come out of that. I have created a protocol of deprogramming that I teach others, but of course I spent many years doing that to myself, and I still have a ways to go. I am under no circumstances totally deprogrammed. It's a lifelong effort to reclaim your own mind and find out who and what you really are, and that's what I do in my work now, for myself and others.
Human beings, and many of you heard this from me before, use less than 10% of their brain capacity. So what happens when you open up that other 90%, or even a portion of that other 90%? Imagine your capabilities and the things that you can do. Bilocation, astral projection, hyperspace work, etc., etc. Complete mental understanding of everything that exists. Everything you ever need to know is already in your mind pattern. That's what the people at Montauk understood, that everything that exists is already in your mind pattern. Montauk took the individual, and my estimation, I know it may differ than other people may have said in the past, But I estimated there were approximately, over the 13 years it existed, about 300,000 people used in the experimentation over those 13 years. And I'm talking about just individuals who were actually physically at the location and worked on individually. Now, of that 300,000 or so, I was told that less than 1% actually survived. So you can do the math. It comes out to just about less than 3,000 people in the world who are walking around right now who actually survived Montauk. And I also understand that there's many people out there who claim to be part of Montauk, and many of them have been in some capacity. But I will tell you that from my own personal experience in that location, almost all of the subjects or targets were male. There were very few female people that were used in the mind control.
Stewart, you write about the Illuminati, and that behind all of this sinister research and use of all of this technology in this way is a group called the Illuminati. Who are the Illuminati?
Make a long story short, there are 13 families that control the resources and the entire planet. And they have their ancestry goes all the way back to Sumerian times. And where then they changed into the Babylonians, they became the Khazars. They entered into Europe, where they merged with the Celtic remnants or the Atlantean refugees, which became the Merovingians. And then that, over the centuries, broke into 13 distinct families that controlled Europe at the time, and then now the entire planet.
But before the Illuminati were the reptilians?
The reptilians were the first colonists on this world. They, for all intents and purposes, own this planet, and that's how they still think. And they are still here. Of course, they were colonizing a continent called Lemuria, which no longer exists. They went underground or into the inner earth, and then they started coming up during the Sumerian times, interbreeding, hybridizing the population so that there's a human and reptilian genetics in all of us. Each one of us has reptilian genetics. And you can see this as a fetus develops in the womb. During the first few weeks of existence, the fetus is an androgynous reptilian, and only then is mammalian genetics opened up in it, proving a hybridization.
So the Illuminati, who are this 13, and are there names to these families?
Yes, you have the Windsors, the Rothschilds, the Romanovs, the Sinclairs. There's a very wide range of Illuminati, but even more so is the range underneath the 13, which is the Committee of 300, which are 300 families that work very closely in association with the Illuminati to accomplish the goals.
You mentioned that in your book, that another way of describing the Illuminati is the New World Order.
Yeah.
And you do, part of your seminar, you ask people to remove a dollar bill. Could you describe that?
Yes.
This. And then there's a space, and then there's the rest of it. This is the all-seeing eye of Osiris. Why is that on American money? And there's wrinkled skin around it, like it was a reptilian eye. And here's the Committee of 300, who keep a space between the Illuminati and the rest of you peons. And here's all the rest of you, especially here. Serious, not even funny. Now, years ago, there used to be a banner under this that said, E pluribus unum, one for all. What does it say now? Novus Ordem Seclorum, New World Order. Did you notice? Did they put that in the newspaper? Look at your dollar bill, and you'll see it.
As we walk up to this massive radar tower, what are you feeling?
Well, it does bring back a lot of the memories from 30 some odd years ago. It was very different back then than it is now. Now it looks old and decrepit, and in those days, I remember in front of the base they had this huge Air Force jet that was on display and surrounded by a fence, which I see is gone now. It's just, it's kind of like when you see stories of the concentration camp victims going back to the concentration camps, and it became a park, and it's not the same as it used to be. It's kind of a weird juxtaposition of visual and memory and time and space, and it's a very strange feeling.
Stewart, the technology from that radar dish, they would beam messages that people would receive and perceive as being their own thoughts.
Correct. They tested it initially here in the local area, especially in the wintertime when there were no tourists, and the town was pretty much empty. There weren't that many year-round locals. And then ultimately, as we got into the late 70s, they started transmitting up to satellites that would then beam that message or whatever they were transmitting back down to either specific areas on the planet or even to specific individuals. And they tested that out for a number of years.
These grounds now are open. It's part of New York State. And we were talking about this, the theory of a place that was for many years off limits. As we see, there are certain areas of this park that are closed. But what's your theory of why they opened it up?
Well, I always go to that story from the 1930s when the French and the British and the Americans were trying to find out about the secret German weapons and aircraft that they were going to use. And during the 36 air show in Paris, the Germans brought out and displayed their secret weapon right in the middle of the exhibit. And of course, the French and the Americans and British never suspected that that would be the secret weapon that they were going to be using, because it was right in front of their nose. So to me, this is the secret weapon being displayed right in front of our nose, and people don't realize what was here, what's underground, and still here underground.
In your book, you mentioned if it's underground, it could be evil.
Anything that has to hide under the ground doesn't have good intentions. That's my opinion.
And here in the United States, there are other sites underground which you've enumerated which fall into that category.
There's approximately 131 underground bases, probably more by now, across the continental United States, but there are many more in other countries and even under the ocean.
This is a decommissioned Air Force base. You also write that the government at this present time is utilizing Air Force bases for other purposes.
They're creating it as detention centers and re-education centers to be used in the future when the New World Order becomes public knowledge. And what we see in Guantanamo now in Cuba, picture that across the United States. If you look at that new piece that's connected to the antenna there, it is very snake-like in design, and to me looks kind of like a winged dragon, and even parts of it could look like the head of the Sphinx. So a very curious connection to a reptilian energy.
That part that you had mentioned that is on now, which wasn't part of this when this was utilized, is not apparent in this photo.
No, well, it looks very different actually than what's actually there now. And you can actually see from that picture over there. Everything's a bit different than it used to be.
One day, in fact it was the 10th anniversary of your
first
marriage, you received a phone call from someone who you didn't know, who said, "I'd like for you to come to attend this meeting. It'll explain a lot about what you've been going through." That phone call just came in from the blue.
Right. It was a woman who lived in Brooklyn. I'm not going to mention names, but I had never heard of her before, but she certainly knew who I was, and invited me to come to a lecture in her apartment in Brooklyn, which was going to be, where there was going to be a lecturer who was heavily involved in the Montauk project. And she knew that I would be very much interested in what he had to say.
The moment you walked into that meeting, did they know you?
The person actually picked me up at my home to bring me to this meeting. And this man who was going to lecture, and he said he knew who I was, and he looked extremely familiar to me. You have to remember, when I was participating in this project, I was basically a young person. And I was not at a very high level, and I didn't know people's names or ranks or what they were doing. All I knew was what I was told to do.
What do you want people to know, your average citizen out there, the significance of all of this? What should we take from all of this?
I use two analogies when people ask me that question. First of all, if you see someone running blindfolded towards the edge of a cliff, what's your responsibility? Do you say, well, that's their karma and they have to fall off, or do you yell at them, or what do you do? My answer for myself was, because my involvement here and it was so negative, I feel an obligation to actually stop the person, pull down their blindfolds, and show them the edge of the cliff. And then I let go and say, now it's up to you. That's one analogy. The other analogy is when people told the Jews in Germany in the 1930s that they better get out because there's something terrible coming, and they said, well, we've been here so many centuries, we are in control of so many things, what could possibly happen to us? And now they're mostly gone. Those are the same two analogies that I say to people right now, because we're on the very edge of becoming a completely manipulated, robotical society, and once that's totally in place, it's going to be very difficult to get rid of it. So I'm trying to get people to wake up and look to see what they're connected to and gain control of their own thoughts and realize what are your thoughts and what are not your thoughts. And you need to take control of your own mind.
Take control of your own mind. How does one take control of their own mind?
Well, it's very interesting because oftentimes people don't realize they are not in control of their own mind. It's kind of like putting on weight. People do that ounce by ounce, and pretty soon they have a pound, or they have 5 pounds, 10 pounds, 30 pounds, and one day they wake up and they say, how did I get this much weight on me? They don't even realize that they were heavy. But if I took a 30-pound sack of flour and I put it on your back and said, walk around with this for a day, you would know about it. It's the same way with what's gone on in society and the powers that be need to control. They've controlled you ounce by ounce and piled it on another ounce by ounce, and pretty soon you're carrying around 30 pounds of mind control within you. You need to stop, figure out what's in you doesn't even belong to you, and release that and get back to who you are so that you can accomplish what you came here to accomplish.
And how do you do that?
We have a series of seminars and exercises, visualizations that we teach to help people reintegrate the left and right hemispheres of the brain, help them to connect to the God mind within them, open the 90% of the brain that isn't used to full capacity, open up the 97% of so-called junk DNA that has so many functions and abilities that we are not aware of. So this is the work that we do, and it's a long process. No one should think that you're going to try this and in a couple of days you're going to be completely in control. It's going to take a bit of time. Each person is different. It depends on their motivation, on their consistency and being persistent. But ultimately, if you do this kind of work that we teach, you will gain control of who you and what you are, and you'll be able to teach that to others.
When you think of Montauk Project now at this point in your life and career, is it a bad memory, or do you see it as something that you had to go through in order to...
Obviously, in my life pattern, I chose this experience on some level. If I hadn't gone through all of that, I wouldn't know what I know today. And, of course I wish it would have been easier. I wish I had a really wonderful life and never heard of such a thing. Most people out there, when they hear about this, they think, oh, that guy's crazy, he's a nut, that kind of reaction. And then I have a lot of people who react violently. And I think that's the fear in them, because they know it's true, they don't want to accept it, because if they do accept it, they have to make radical changes in their lives. So, in a way, I'm very grateful, despite it all, for what I went through. If I hadn't gone through it, I would not have met Janet. I probably wouldn't even be alive right now, if that were the case. Yeah, I think I am who I am because of what I went through, and maybe I can prevent others from going through the same kind of thing and just go straight to their real self.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Stewart, for coming all the way to join us here at Camp Hero in Montauk. I know there's a lot of controversy surrounding what we are presenting today, but one thing for sure, it is thought-provoking. So we appreciate your sharing your writings, your point of view, and continued success to both of you.
Thank you so much for having us.